The wind screamed like it had a soul, to lose raw, feral, and full of grief. It tore down the slopes of the Winter Mountains in ragged gusts, biting into the seams of Jonah Whitlock's coat, as he knelt in the snow, clutching his side. Blood bloomed across his ribs, warm and sticky beneath the buckskin. He could barely feel his fingers, but the pain in his chest flared with every breath like coals under cracked ribs. He hadn't meant to fall. One patch of black ice on a game trail, one split-second slip, and he'd gone down hard straight onto a jagged stump hidden beneath the powder. The gash wasn't deep, but it was wide, and he hadn't stopped bleeding since he hauled himself upright. Jonah didn't curse, didn't shout, just pressed a torn rag against the wound, cinched his belt over it tight, and kept walking. Because that's what men did when they didn't care if they died, but sure as hell weren't ready to lie down yet. The cabin came into view just as the light disappeared. It looked more like a collapsed barn than a home, half the shingles gone, porch sagging like a broken jaw, and the chimney coughed smoke only when it felt like it. Still, it stood crooked but defiant, like Jonah himself. He staggered up the steps and shouldered the door open. The hinges groaned loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the air was stale with old ash and pine pitch. The fire had gone out while he was out hunting hell that felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been hours. He knelt stiffly and rebuilt the fire from embers buried in the ash, feeding it dry wood until it caught. Flames licked up into the hearth, and the cabin warmed with the smell of smoke and iron. Jonah leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Every muscle ached. His breath rattled, and the blood had soaked through both shirt and coat now. The wound wasn't going to kill him, not tonight anyway, but it reminded him sharply that no matter how far you climbed, or how deep into nowhere you ran, your body always remembered. So did the mountain. It had been almost a year since Jonah Whitlock last spoke to another human being. Maybe longer. He didn't keep calendars. Time out here wasn't about days or months. It was about thaw and freeze, light and dark, hunger and not. He'd come here to disappear. Not in the romantic sense. He didn't want peace, he wanted stillness, oblivion maybe. The kind that comes slowly like frostbite. You don't notice it at first, and by the time you do, it's already inside your bones. I came up here to die, he muttered to the fire, not to remember. But the thing about silence, it doesn't kill memory. It feeds it. His wife's face still flickered behind his eyes sometimes. His daughter's laugh echoed in the timber when the wind hit the right way. Her small footprints once danced through snow just like this. And now, nothing. Not even a grave. Just ash on the wind, and a man too stubborn to follow. He drank strong coffee brewed with melted snow, then stripped off his shirt to check the wound. Ugly, but clean. He packed it with pine sap and tied it tight with a linen strip soaked in whiskey. Tomorrow he'd boil some willow bark and stitch it if his hands could hold a needle. That should have been the end of it. Just another night in the cold, another wound earned another reason not to wake up. But something was wrong. He felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air. A heaviness. Then the sound. Not wind. Not coyote. Not tree branch. A knock. 3 soft, deliberate knocks on his cabin door. Jonah froze. No one should be out here. Not in this weather. Not this far from any trail worth naming. Unless it was a trap. Or worse, someone running from something worse. He stood slowly, grabbing his rifle. Another knock. Slower this time. Jonah walked to the door, heart pounding. He hadn't spoken aloud to another soul in months, hadn't opened that door for anyone but his own shadow. He hesitated. If you open that door, he heard his wife's voice whisper in the back of his skull, you can't close it again. He opened it, and the wind exploded in. There, silhouetted by snow and moonlight, stood a woman and a child. The woman looked barely conscious, barefoot, shivering her dress, torn arms wrapped around a small bundle that whimpered. Blood trickled down her temple. The boy looked about 6, face buried in her chest, eyes closed. She locked eyes with Jonah and for a second time bent around the storm. "Please," she rasped. "He's just a child. Don't let him die out here." Her knees buckled. Jonah dropped his rifle and caught her before she hit the porch. The boy made no sound, limp in her arms. Jonah didn't think. He acted. He pulled them inside. He laid her down on the pallet near the fire and wrapped them both in every spare blanket he owned. The boy had a pulse, faint but steady. The woman's breath came shallow. Her skin was ice. He stoked the fire, high-boiled water, found some dried roots and pine tea. When she stirred, he helped her drink. She didn't speak. She just stared at the ceiling like it held answers. Jonah sat down across from them, still holding the rifle, staring into the flames, like they might explain what just happened. A woman and her child, running, bleeding, out here in the cold, on his doorstep. He didn't ask questions, not yet. But he knew deep down where the frost never reached that whatever silence he'd carved for himself out of these hills, it was over now. The woman wakes. She speaks a name, Sani. The boy's name is Tavio, and the reason they're out here, the man they're running from, will make Jonah wish he'd left that door shut. But it's too late now. Because the mountain doesn't forget, and neither do men like Barlow Creed. If you open that door, you can't close it again. The words echoed inside Jonah's head as he stood in the corner of the cabin, arms crossed over his chest, eyes fixed on the woman, bundled beneath the elk-hide blanket. She hadn't moved in over an hour, though the color had returned to her lips, and her breathing no longer came in sharp, shallow gasps. The boy Tavio she had whispered before collapsing was curled beside her, one hand clutching a small cloth-wrapped bundle like it was the last solid thing in the world. Jonah hadn't spoken since dragging them in. The fire snapped. Shadows danced across the log walls. Outside, the storm had turned into a steady snowfall. Less savage now, but cold enough to kill. He knew that well. He poured hot water over dried pine needles and willow bark, then brought the tin mug over to her. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, guarded and feral like a deer sensing a hunter too late. She tried to sit, winced, and reached instinctively for the boy. "He's fine," Jonah said, his voice low and rough from disuse. "Sleeping." She didn't relax. Jonah set the mug on a crate beside her. "Drink this. It'll warm your guts and help the pain." She stared at him like she wasn't sure if he was real or another cruel trick from the wind. "Where am I? My cabin," Jonah replied. "Halfway up the Winter Ridge. Closest settlement's 12 miles if you're riding. More if you're bleeding." She looked around at the stacked firewood, the rusted tools, the rifle leaning near the door. Then at the dried blood on his shirt. "You're hurt." He shrugged. "You first." She took the mug and drank. Slow, careful, then voice thin. "My name's Sani. My boy's Tavio. We came from the flats near Green River." Jonah nodded, though the name stirred nothing. He hadn't been near Green River in years. Towns bled together out here. "Who did this to you?" She hesitated. Her grip on the mug tightened. "A man named Barlow Creed." Jonah's jaw flexed. Creed. He knew that name. Most men out here did if they lived long enough. Creed was a trader, once a bounty man. Then he started moving people, mostly women, some children. Ute, Mexican, Navajo, anyone without a voice loud enough to matter. Last Jonah heard, Creed had vanished somewhere east near Colorado line. Now he was here, he took everything Sonny said. My sister, my home, I escaped 2 weeks ago. We ran west. He's hunting us. Jonah said nothing. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door, she added quickly. I just needed somewhere warm. Just for the boy. Jonah stood, walked to the stove, and opened it. Flames glowed back. He fed it another log. Silence sat between them like a bear watching from the dark. You think he'll track you here? She didn't answer right away. Then, if he thinks I know where it is, he'll never stop. Jonah turned. Where what is? Her eyes flicked toward the floorboards just for a second. Jonah caught it. Something's buried here, he said. A statement, not a question. I don't know exactly what she said carefully. He mentioned a place once. Said it held things he couldn't carry, but couldn't let go of. Secrets, maybe. Stolen gold. Relics. He's a man who builds his life on threats. That cabin, it was his. Jonah stiffened. You're saying this was Creed's, she nodded. He abandoned it years ago after a raid went bad. Thought it had been burned. But there was talk, quiet talk, that he left things behind. Things worth killing for. Jonah looked around his own damn cabin like it had betrayed him. Of course. The busted boards, the makeshift repairs, the charred beams in the back room. Someone had torched it before him, and someone else had hidden something worth killing for underneath it. He stood silent for a long time. Then, you and your boy can stay. Until you heal, that's it. Sonny looked surprised, then skeptical. Why? Because it's too late, Jonah muttered, grabbing his coat. Door's already open. He stepped outside. Snow fell thick but gentle now. He walked around the cabin checking for tracks. Just his. And theirs. No others. Yet, still, he didn't like how exposed the place felt. No fence, no lookout. Only one exit, and the chimney was loud as a preacher on Sunday. He needed to plan, reinforce, prepare. Inside, the boy stirred. Small feet pattered across the floor. Tavio stood blinking at the fire, one hand still clutching the cloth bundle, an old wooden rabbit carved by hand. He held it like it held him back from breaking. You hungry? Jonah asked. Tavio just nodded. Jonah gave him a strip of smoked venison. The boy sat cross-legged, eating, slow eyes darting to the door. Does he talk? Jonah asked Sonny, who'd woken again. Only when he's dreaming. Jonah watched the boy. I'll start fixing the place up. If Creed's coming, we'll need more than logs and prayers. Sonny pushed herself upright. I can help. You'll rest. Heal. The boy, too. She looked at him hard. He doesn't stop for weather or women or children. If he thinks I know about what's here, he'll burn this place down. Jonah looked her in the eyes for the first time since she arrived. Then we'll make damn sure he burns with it. Later that evening, Jonah returned to the damaged floorboard, the one he'd hit with his hammer the day before. He pried it up. Underneath, in the dirt and cold, something metallic glinted. A half-buried coin. Spanish. Silver. Beside it, the edge of a leather satchel. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just stared down at it. And for the first time in a long while, Jonah Whitlock felt the mountain lean in and whisper, not just with wind, but with memory. Not his. Someone else's. and it was unfinished. In the coming days, Jonah will dig deeper, literally and metaphorically, into what Creed left behind. Sani's knowledge of his past grows more critical, and the question of whether to run or stand will no longer be Jonah's alone. Because soon they'll have company, and Creed never comes alone. Some gold ain't worth the blood it costs. Jonah sat on the floor, knees stiff from crouching too long, fingers crusted with dirt and old sap. The floorboards around him were pried up like a broken mouth, revealing what someone had tried real hard to forget. The satchel he'd pulled up was weather-worn leather flaking at the seams, but it was sealed tight, wrapped in old canvas and bound with twine. He cut it open with the tip of his knife and found the weight he already felt in his chest. Coins, a lot of them. Spanish silver, a few American eagles, some with markings he didn't recognize, tribal etchings carved into metal not meant for commerce. Jonah didn't breathe for a few seconds, not because of the silver, because of what lay beneath it. Bundles of beads, feathers, and small clay tokens, Ute by the look of them, items buried with the dead or taken from the sacred. Stuff no man had any right keeping, much less hiding under his floor like firewood. He shifted through the bag slowly, careful not to disturb what felt wrong. At the bottom, wrapped in buckskin, was a braid of dark hair, small, child-sized. Jonah stood up fast and backed away. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the room felt cold again. He didn't know if it was a burial or a warning, or both. Sani leaned over the bag, her face pale, her hands trembling. She reached in gently and touched the tokens like they were burning. "I've seen these before," she whispered. "Not exactly these, but like them." Jonah kept quiet, watching her closely. "When I was little, my Tio used to tell stories of the raids, how men came at night and took what they wanted, land daughters' relics. The soldiers didn't care. But some men weren't soldiers. They were worse," Creed Jonah said. She nodded. "He led one of those raids, maybe more. Said he found treasures no one would miss. Things buried with people no one had come looking for." She reached into the bag and pulled out a carved eagle no bigger than her palm. This was meant to stay buried. Tavio stood behind her silent. He hadn't spoken since they arrived. He stared down into the bag like he understood more than he could say. Jonah felt a knot twist in his chest. This wasn't just loot. It was desecration. "So Creed buried it here?" Jonah asked. "Why not take it with him?" Sani looked at him. "Because it's cursed. To him. He said so." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "You believe that I believe in guilt," she said. "And guilt makes men do strange things, like burying gold and running from it." Jonah turned to the window, looking out at the white hills rolling into the tree line. His voice was low. "And now he wants it back." "Or he wants to know if I found it first," Sani replied. "He thinks I know." Jonah exhaled. Long, rough. "If we give it back, would he stop?" Sani shook her head. "You don't know Creed. He doesn't deal, he takes." Jonah spent the next 2 days digging around the cabin. Not just for more treasure, he didn't want it. But he needed to know what Creed left. Whether there was more. Whether this was bait or accident. He found 3 more pouches, one filled with ceremonial knives, bone-handled, stained. Another had gold nuggets the size of walnuts. The last held a stack of letters, water-damaged but legible in parts. They were from men Jonah recognized from old bounty posters. Names crossed out, prices scribbled beside them. One name was circled Wakara James. That stopped Jonah cold. Wakara had been his friend once, long ago. They'd scouted together during the army skirmishes, watched each other's backs when the frontier burned. Jonah left that life. Wakara didn't. They hadn't spoken since the raid on Ash Hollow, and now his name was on Creed's list. Jonah folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. He was going to need help, and he knew where to start. That night, as the wind settled into low moans through the chimney, Sani sat sharpening one of the ceremonial knives, not to use just to keep her hands busy. Jonah sat across from her. "I'll head into the valley tomorrow," he said. "There's a man down there, Cutter Reeves. Smith, sort of. Knows how to rig things. Might be willing to help us reinforce the place. Can we trust him?" Jonah shrugged. "No. But he hates Creed worse than most." Sani nodded slowly. "Then, what about Wakara?" Jonah's eyes narrowed. "What about him?" "He's still alive. I heard his name a month before I ran. He's watching the northern trails. Some say he's planning to take back what was stolen." Jonah didn't answer. Sani leaned forward, her voice softer. "If this was your family's grave, wouldn't you want someone to tell you what was buried there?" Jonah looked down at his hands. The scar on his palm twitched. "I'm not the same man he knew. Maybe he isn't either." The next morning, Jonah loaded his mule with supplies and gear. Tavio handed him a small slingshot carved from an old tree root. It wasn't a weapon, just something the boy had made. "For luck," Sani said. Jonah tucked it into his coat. He took one last look at the cabin, at the smoke rising, at the woman and the boy standing in the doorway, and felt something dangerous curl in his gut. Not fear. Responsibility. He hadn't felt that in a long time. As he disappeared down the trail, Sani watched until he was gone. Then she turned back into the cabin. She went to the hole in the floor and stared down at the artifacts, the coins, the bones of a story no one wanted to finish, and whispered, "Some gold ain't worth the blood it costs." Jonah reaches the foothills and finds Cutter Reeves, the blacksmith, with old scars and older grudges. Sani begins training to protect herself and Tavio. The first snowmelt reveals footprints near the creek. Creed's scouts aren't far. The question becomes clear: run again, or fight back. If we stay, we bleed. If we run, we rot. So what's left? The mule snorted under Jonah's hand as they climbed the last bend of the trail, snow crunching under iron-hoofed steps. His breath steamed in the cold, rolling out in heavy puffs, the mountain air thinner now. Pines gave way to sheer granite outcroppings, and nestled between two walls of stone like it had been punched into the earth by a vengeful god, sat Cutter Reeves's forge. It was little more than a lean-to built around black rock and stubborn iron, but it hissed smoke from a stovepipe and echoed with the rhythmic pound of hammer to anvil. The sound carried down the canyon like a war drum. Jonah dismounted and approached, slow hands visible. Inside, Cutter moved with the mechanical grace of someone who lived more in muscle memory than thought. He looked up, once squinted past the steam of his breath, and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." "Jonah Whitlock. I figured you were bones in a ravine somewhere." "Still breathing," Jonah said. "For now." Cutter shoved the hot iron into the quenched steam, roaring like a wounded beast. "If you're here, it ain't for coffee." Jonah nodded. "I need your help." Cutter didn't answer right away. He turned, peeled off his gloves, and picked up a tin cup from the coals. He sipped, then said, "Help for what? You finally decide to shoot yourself and want me to load the gun." Jonah didn't flinch. Creed's name come up again. That stopped him cold. The blacksmith's lips pulled tight around the cup. "Don't joke about that son of a bitch." "I'm not." He's coming for something buried near my cabin. The woman he's after, Sonny, escaped him. She's got a boy. They're both up there with me." "And you let him stay?" Cutter asked, incredulous. "Hell, Jonah. You ain't built for people." "I didn't plan on it. That's what makes it worse." Cutter set the cup down and walked outside. Jonah followed. The sky was clear for once, brittle blue and cloudless, the air so cold it burned in the lungs. "I got scars from that bastard. I still ain't finished bleeding," Cutter muttered. "He took my brother's girl, sold her somewhere south. That was 6 winters back. I ain't forgot." "I don't want forgiveness," Jonah said. "I want steel." Cutter turned. "For what?" "To make sure he never leaves that mountain." They stood in silence, only the crackle of distant pine sap popping in the fire behind them. Finally, Cutter said, "I don't make weapons for ghosts, Jonah." "You aiming to be one?" Jonah's eyes didn't waver. "Not today." By afternoon, Cutter was loading tools onto a sled behind the mule. Iron spikes, wire, traps, a crate of forged nails, 2 rifles, and a bundle of boards he'd pre-cut in the fall. He didn't ask for coin, just tied it all down like he'd been waiting years to haul it back into hell. "You tell the woman what this means?" he asked. "She knows. She fight. She's learning. She better learn fast." Back at the cabin, Sonny was already outside when Jonah returned, splitting kindling with short, quick swings of the hatchet. Tavio sat nearby with a slingshot, launching pebbles at stacked cans. He wasn't good yet, but he wasn't bad either. Jonah dismounted and nodded toward Cutter. "This is him," he said to Sonny. "Cutter Reeves. Old friend." "Friend's a stretch." Cutter grunted. Sonny looked him up and down, then nodded once. "You know how to trap a man before he reaches the door. I know how to make sure he don't leave after." That night they laid plans. Cutter studied the cabin walls, the roofline, the snowdrifts around the perimeter. "We build spike trenches on the south side, reinforce the north with rock and ash logs, block off the back window, fire escape through the root cellar." "We only have 3 rifles," Jonah said. "And 1 angry woman," Cutter added. Sonny smirked. The next morning the work began. Jonah and Cutter sawed and hammered until their arms shook. Sonny dug post holes with her bare hands when the spade snapped. Tavio watched everything, every motion, every nail. When Sonny stopped to breathe, he handed her a canteen like it was sacred. Jonah caught himself watching them too long. Sonny hair tied back, face streaked with soot, sleeves rolled. Not soft, not helpless, but something else. Still alive, still fighting. That stirred something in him. Something old. Dangerous. He buried it and kept hammering. That night the 4 of them sat around the fire. Cutter sharpened a blade. Sonny sewed a tear in Tavio's coat. Jonah smoked, staring at the map they'd drawn in charcoal on the floor, X's marking where death would lie in wait. "We could leave," Sonny said softly. Everyone looked up. "If we go now," she continued, "we could make it through Salt Lake. Maybe farther, maybe south." Cutter chuckled bitterly. "You think Creed stops chasing just 'cause you move? Maybe he'd slow. Maybe you'd die cold and alone in a gully." She bristled. "You don't know me." "No," Cutter said. "But I know what Creed does to people who run." Jonah tapped ash into the fire. "He's right." Sonny stood, frustration flaring in her voice. "Then what?" "We die here. Let him burn it down." Jonah looked her dead in the eye. "If we stay, we bleed. If we run, we rot. So what's left?" No one answered. But Tavio climbed into his mother's lap and curled into her side like he already knew the truth. After they'd gone to bed, Jonah sat alone listening to the wind press against the boards like a breathing thing. Cutter came out from the back room and sat beside him. "She's got more fire than most," Cutter said. "She'll need it." "Still think you're not built for people." Jonah didn't answer. Outside, something shifted in the snow. Both men stood quietly. Cutter walked to the window, then cursed under his breath. Jonah joined him and saw it too. Boot prints, fresh ones, leading up from the creek. Jonah and Cutter follow the trail, realizing scouts have already arrived. The time for preparation shrinks. Cutter agrees to stay and build defenses. Sonny insists on learning to shoot. The war isn't coming, it's already here. And the mountain is no longer neutral ground. "I don't make weapons for ghosts, Jonah. You aiming to be one?" Jonah moved through the tree line like a shadow boots, quiet in the powdery snow, rifle low in his hands. Cutter followed close behind, less graceful but steady, the weight of a revolver on his hip and a skinning knife in his boot. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The fresh boot prints leading from the creek told them more than words could. 3 sets, maybe 4. Light-footed, no horses. That meant scouts, the worst kind of visitor. Creed's eyes and ears always came first. They didn't make demands or give warnings. They watched noted weaknesses slipped back to their master like rats to the den. And when they returned, it was never alone. Jonah raised his hand and crouched behind a fallen pine. Cutter knelt beside him. 50 yards ahead, faint movement, a figure hunched near a stand of aspen bundled in a tattered duster, looking toward the cabin through field glasses. He didn't know he was being watched. That mistake would cost him. Jonah didn't aim yet. He watched, assessed. No visible rifle, no saddlebags, probably traveling light, not local. The boots were too new and the coat didn't match any trapper's style. This one had a job and he was already late reporting back. Cutter leaned in. "What do you want to do, scare him?" Jonah whispered. "Make sure he knows we saw him and could have ended him." "That's not how I was taught." "You weren't taught by the Ute." Cutter grunted. "You got 30 seconds. Jonah moved like wind over ice, silent, sudden. He broke from cover, slipped around the ridge, and circled behind. Cutter stepped into view, rifle raised, not pointing, but clear. The scout froze, startled. Then snap. Jonah pressed his rifle barrel against the back of the scout's neck. "Drop the glass," he said. The man hesitated. Jonah jabbed harder. The binoculars hit the snow. Cutter stepped forward and kicked them away. "Who sent you?" Jonah asked. Silence. Jonah grabbed the man by the collar and shoved him down to his knees. Cutter drew his revolver and pointed it at the man's foot. "Won't kill you," he said, voice flat. "But it'll ruin your walking." Still nothing. Jonah crouched, studying the scout's face. Young, probably no more than 20, trying to look defiant, but his jaw trembled. "Creed sent you," Jonah said. The man flinched. That was enough. Jonah leaned in close. "You go back to him, you tell him this, we know he's watching, we know what he buried, and we're not running." The man swallowed. You don't understand what he is." Jonah stood. "We don't care." He stepped back, motioned to Cutter, and let the scout crawl away, clutching his pride like a wounded limb. As the man disappeared into the trees, Cutter shook his head. "I don't make weapons for ghosts, Jonah." "You aiming to be one?" "No," Jonah said. "I aim to haunt his dreams first." Back at the cabin, the wind had picked up again. The sun was gone, swallowed by thick clouds, and the temperature dropped hard and fast. Inside, Sonny sat near the fire, Tavio asleep in her lap. his small hands clutching the slingshot Jonah had carved down for him. She looked up when the door opened. "Well?" she asked. Jonah closed the door and bolted it. "He was alone," Cutter said, stripping off his gloves. "But not for long." "We need to move faster," Jonah added. Sani rose gently, laid Tavio down on the pallet, and stepped into the main room. "Then teach me," she said. Jonah looked at her. She met his stare without blinking. "I need to shoot," she continued. "Need to fight. You two won't always be standing between me and him. I'm done being someone who's hunted." Cutter chuckled from the corner. "She's got fire." Jonah grabbed the rifle off the wall and held it out to her. "Let's see if she's got aim." They spent the next morning behind the cabin. Jonah built a makeshift range from split logs and rusty cans. Snow fell in a slow drift, painting everything in soft white, but Sani's hands were steady. Jonah showed her the stance, the breath work, the squeeze, not the pull. The rifle jumped in her hands the first time. She blinked, adjusted, fired again, and again. By the fourth shot, she was hitting metal. Cutter watched from the porch, whittling a stick into a snare hook. "She's a better shot than you were when we met," he said. Jonah didn't argue. At night, they worked in silence. Cutter laid out wire traps along the creek. Jonah reinforced the root cellar. Sani readied bags with food and winter gear in case they had to flee on short notice. Tavio helped where he could, and when he couldn't, he listened. Always listening. It wasn't a cabin anymore. It was a fortress. Or a grave. 2 days later, the snow eased. The sky cleared just enough to show a bruised sun through gauzy clouds. That morning, while tending the smokehouse, Cutter called out, "Jonah, you better come see this." Jonah stepped outside, rifle-slung boots crunching on the packed trail. Cutter pointed. Down near the edge of the clearing, half melted by the stove runoff, were new tracks. 2 sets, one smaller, one dragging. Jonah crouched. "Someone was watching again," he said. "Closer this time." Cutter nodded. "You think it's the same kid?" No, Jonah said. "This one stayed longer." That night they posted watches. Sani insisted on taking the second shift. Jonah didn't argue. They'd crossed a line now. There would be no going back. After midnight, as Jonah stood on the porch, rifle across his arms, the snow started again. Light, quiet. He looked down at the cabin's warped steps, at the faint trail disappearing into the woods. Soon they'd come. And this place, this patch of cold and wood and defiance, would either become legend or a story the wind buried with the bones. The next day, a new intruder breaches the outer perimeter. Jonah catches him. This time, they don't just watch, Creed sends a warning. Sani kills for the first time. The cabin is no longer a hideout. It's officially a target. Every trap, every bullet, every ally will matter. You kill a man, it don't end him. It just passes the weight to you. The scream cut through the trees like a blade. Jonah dropped the plank he was hammering and spun toward the sound. Cutter looked up from the trench he was reinforcing near the south slope. Both men locked eyes for half a second before breaking into a run. It came from the west side near the snare line Jonah had laid just before dawn. Snow crunched under their boots as they charged through the thinning trees. The wind had died that morning, but the air was still bitter sharp enough to sting the lungs. Another cry, shorter this time, more like a groan. Jonah reached the clearing first. A man no older than 30 hung upside down from a twisted sapling, one leg caught in a snare that now strained under his weight. Blood soaked his pant leg where the wire had torn flesh. He thrashed weakly, face pale, one arm reaching toward a revolver in the snow beneath him. Jonah leveled his rifle. "Don't," he warned. The man froze, gritted his teeth. Cutter stepped into the clearing, panting knife in hand. Another one different from the scout, Jonah said. He moved closer. The man glared at him, blood on his teeth. "You're Whitlock, huh?" the man spat. "Creed said you'd piss your pants first sign of heat." Jonah said nothing. "He's coming," the man added, lip curling. "And he's gonna carve your name into that woman's back." Jonah's finger twitched on the trigger. But before he could speak, before Cutter could react, there was a sharp crack from the trees behind them. The man jerked violently, then went still. A bullet had punched through his temple. Jonah turned fast, rifle raised. Sonny stood between two pines holding his second rifle. Smoke curled from the barrel. She didn't move, didn't say a word, just lowered the weapon slowly. Back at the cabin, no one spoke for a while. They buried the body in a shallow pit beyond the perimeter. Cutter stripped the corpse, first took the revolver, a half-eaten ration, and a scrap of cloth with a red circle burned into it. Creed's mark. Branded, not stitched. Like a cult. Like property. Jonah scrubbed the blood from the rifle barrel, hands shaking just enough to notice. The sun had started to break through the cloud cover, laying pale light across the clearing. It looked almost peaceful, like nothing had happened. But it had. Sonny sat on the edge of the porch, her face blank. Tavio stayed inside, silent. Jonah approached slowly and sat beside her. "You didn't have to," he said, voice quiet. "Yes," she replied. "I did." He waited. Sonny didn't cry, didn't tremble. But her hand rested on her stomach like she was trying to anchor herself to something. "I saw him reaching," she said. "Saw his mouth. Knew what he'd say." Jonah nodded. "I thought it'd feel like justice," she whispered. "But it doesn't." "It won't," he said. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever." She looked at him. "You've killed before. Too many times. How do you live with it?" Jonah hesitated. "You kill a man, it don't end him. It just passes the weight to you." Sonny let that sit between them. Then I guess I'm carrying now." Cutter found tracks later that afternoon. 2 men, maybe 3, circling wide around the ridge. Not scouts this time. Killers. Testing their perimeter. Staying just out of sight. This was a warning, he said, pointing back toward the shallow grave. That guy. He wasn't supposed to come back. Jonah nodded grimly. "Creed's letting us know it's begun." "He's not attacking yet," Cutter said. "That means he's waiting on something." Reinforcements, Jonah guessed. Or something worse. They both looked toward the mountains beyond the valley. Silence rolled in like fog. That night, Sonny trained again, this time with the revolver they'd taken. Her hands were steadier now. Not hard. Not cruel, just sure. Tavio stayed close to her side. Jonah noticed how the boy never flinched anymore at loud sounds. Never hid his eyes when the guns were cleaned. Some part of him had already accepted this as normal. Jonah hated that, but he also understood it. That was how survivors were made. Inside, Cutter laid out a new plan. "We trap the creek trail next. Gasoline if you've got it. Make them think twice before pushing in." "We'll need more ammo," Jonah muttered. "And someone watching the high trail. They might try from above." Sonny folded her arms. "We need more people." Cutter scoffed. "Where you plan to find 'em?" "Hang a poster in the snow, no," Sonny said. "But Jonah might know someone." Both men looked at her. She didn't blink. Wakara. Jonah leaned back against the table. The name hit like a stone in the chest. I haven't spoken to him in a long time, he said. But you said he's alive, she pushed. And if Creed's behind this, he'll want to know. Jonah stared at the flame in the lantern. His mind went back to the letter, the old map, the carved tokens in the satchel. Wakara's name had been circled for a reason. All right, he said finally. At first light, I ride out. Sani frowned. Alone. They won't expect me to go far. I can move faster that way. Cutter nodded. You go find Wakara. We'll hold the fort. Jonah looked at Sani. If they come, we fight, she said, already knowing what he meant. No one runs. He gave her a slow nod. She returned it. Later that night, long after the fire had burned down, and Cutter was snoring in the corner, Jonah sat near the window watching the tree line. The sky had cleared just enough to show a sickle moon. Cold light glinted off the snowdrifts, and somewhere out there, maybe a mile, maybe 100 yards, Creed was watching too. Jonah could feel it, like breath on the back of his neck, like a prayer said in reverse. The war hadn't started. It had simply arrived. Jonah rides out at dawn to find Wakara following a dangerous trail through old Ute hunting grounds. Meanwhile, Cutter and Sani defend the cabin as Creed's pressure tightens. Tavio makes a discovery in the woods that changes everything. Creed isn't just coming, he's already inside the perimeter. Sometimes to go forward, you gotta face what you buried. The sky was still bleeding from night when Jonah left the cabin. He didn't say goodbye, just saddled the mule packed light and rolled out before dawn could get a good look at him. The cold was sharp, sharper than usual. That kind of mountain cold that didn't just bite the skin, but clamped onto your bones like it had a score to settle. He followed the northern trail, half forgotten and mostly overgrown, weaving between granite bluffs and frozen creeks that once marked Ute hunting paths. No one used these routes anymore, not since the mining companies tore through the west like locusts. But Jonah remembered them. Wakara had taught him once long ago when they were boys and brothers in everything but blood, back when honor still meant something. It was strange riding alone again after all these years. Strange to care who was behind him. He didn't like how much he cared now. By midday he reached the narrow pass where the stone turned red and the air thinned enough to make the heart race. That's where the signal would be if Wakara was still alive and still watching. He dismounted and whistled low, a pattern sharp, then soft like a bird calling a name. Nothing at first. Then above him on the ridge a figure appeared, tall, wrapped in furs, bow drawn. Jonah held up both hands. I ain't dead yet, brother. The figure didn't move. Then slowly the bow lowered. Wakara James descended like a shadow slipping from the rock. They sat by a small fire in the hollow of a cave where the wind couldn't reach. Wakara had aged, but not softened. His hair was streaked with gray, now tied back in the way his grandfather used to wear it. His eyes, though, same as always. Sharp, patient, like stone worn by time but never broken. You shouldn't have come, Wakara said, not unkindly. I didn't have a choice, Jonah replied. Creed's alive. Wakara's jaw flexed, but he didn't look surprised. I figured, he muttered. He's like a bad tooth, can't ever seem to dig him out all the way. He's hunting a woman. Her name's Sani. She's Ute. Her boy, too. They're with me. And you're protecting them, Wakara asked. Jonah nodded. Trying to. Wakara leaned forward. You remember Mesa Ridge? Jonah didn't answer. Wakara waited. That day I told you the old ways would come back to haunt us. That blood has a memory. You said you didn't believe in ghosts. I do now. Silence stretched between them. Then Wakara stood and walked to the mouth of the cave, looked down the slope toward the west, toward Jonah's cabin, toward Creed. I've been hearing whispers, he said. Creed's building something. Not just fear. Loyalty. Men who follow him like he's a prophet. They believe he's carrying the bones of the past. For a reason, he is, Jonah said. They're buried under my floorboards. That got Wakara's attention. Stolen relics. Sacred pieces. Maybe even graves. Wakara turned slowly. And you're asking me to fight for that? No, Jonah said. I'm asking you to fight so they can rest. Wakara didn't speak for a long time, just stood there with the wind pulling at his coat like it was trying to drag him back into the mountain. Then sometimes to go forward, you gotta face what you buried. He turned to Jonah. I'll come. But we bring them back with us. The relics, the bones, everything. It ends clean. Jonah nodded. It has to. Back at the cabin, the walls groaned with the weight of the storm rolling in. Cutter adjusted the rifle sight from the window, eyeing the tree line. Something's off, he muttered. Sani paced near the door. What do you mean, no birds? No prints? No sign of fresh tracks in the last 24 hours? Like they're just waiting. Sani glanced toward Tavio, who sat drawing on a scrap of bark with a charcoal nub. Waiting for what? Cutter shook his head. For Jonah to leave, which means they already knew he would. Sani's stomach sank. You think they're already close? Cutter looked back at the boy. I think they're already here. That night, Tavio woke up screaming. Sani rushed to his side, arms around him, before the second breath. His face was pale, eyes wide, pointing toward the wall. There was a man, he whispered. Inside. Watching me. Cutter grabbed the rifle and moved to the door, checking the locks, the windows, every corner. Nothing. But when he opened the hatch to the root cellar, cold air poured in. The door had been unlatched. At dawn, Jonah and Wakara reached the ridge above the cabin. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, but the stillness was wrong. Even from here, Jonah felt it. Something's coming, Wakara said, hand resting on the bough at his back. Jonah nodded. They moved fast, cutting down through the slope, sliding through the trees. At the clearing's edge, they paused, watching, waiting. Then a single gunshot cracked through the air. From inside the cabin. The cabin is breached. One of Creed's men has infiltrated and attacks from within. Sani is forced to defend Tavio alone before Jonah and Wakara arrive just in time. After the attack, they realize Creed's full force is camped just over the ridge waiting for nightfall. There's no more hiding. War begins at sundown. You don't pick the moment war begins. It picks you and you answer or you vanish. The gunshot echoed like a thunderclap across the clearing, scattering birds from the pines and sending every heartbeat in the cabin slamming against ribs. Sani hit the floor instinctively, dragging Tavio with her behind the overturned table. Cutter was already moving, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the stairwell leading up to the loft. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the frame above the fireplace. Wood exploded, raining dust and soot across the floor. He's inside, Cutter growled. Upstairs, Tavio whimpered. Sani kissed the top of his head. Stay down. No matter what. She snatched the revolver from the holster Jonah had left by the door and looked at Cutter. You push him left, she whispered. I'll take him right. Cutter hesitated just a second, then nodded. They moved. Sani kept low, crawling along the edge of the hearth, the revolver sweating in her hand. Cutter stomped up the first step, loud on purpose. The intruder took the bait. A third shot cracked and punched through the wall just above Cutter's head. He ducked, fired once blindly toward the loft. Sani slipped up the backside of the stairs, crouched and aimed high. Her breath slowed. Her fingers steadied. She saw the shadow move. Bang! The man dropped from the loft like dead weight, hit the floor, hard rifle, skittering away across the boards. He groaned once, then tried to rise. Sani didn't hesitate. One more shot. Clean. Final. Silence followed thick and hot in the chest. Cutter checked the body, then looked at Sani. Quick hands, he said. Steady aim. Sani didn't answer. She walked back to Tavio and sat down beside him. The boy looked up. He was already inside. She nodded. Yes. How? That was the question. Cutter searched the body, finding a worn sigil sewn into the lining of the coat, Creed's mark, again burned into leather this time. They're not just watching anymore, he said. They're testing us, softening the walls. And he knew the layout, Sani added. He came through the cellar. Which means he's been here before. Jonah's voice came from the doorway, breathless. Because he has. They turned. He and Wakara stood framed in the snowlight, both dusted white from their run. Sani rose quickly. You made it back. He nodded, but his eyes were on the corpse. That's Morgan Reed, Jonah said darkly. Used to ride with Creed back when they were scum for hire. Wakara moved inside and closed the door. You sure I'd know that rat face anywhere? He slit a mother's throat in Eagle Pass while she held her child. Bragged about it over stew. Which means Cutter said Creed sent him to do the same here. Jonah's jaw clenched. Where's the boy, he asked. Tavio peeked from behind the table. Jonah's whole body eased by a fraction. We're out of time, Wakara said. Creed wouldn't send Morgan unless he was ready to finish it. Cutter nodded grimly. We should check the ridge, see if they're setting camp. The four adults hiked the narrow path behind the cabin that led to the old fire tower, half-rotted, but high enough to see the next valley over. Cutter climbed first, checking for rot before waving the rest up. What they saw made the blood drop from their faces. Campfires. Dozens. Dotting the hillside like glowing eyes. Men moved between them, dark shapes sharpening blades, tending horses, loading rifles. Far below, just out of range, Creed's banner flapped gently in the breeze. A red circle scorched into black canvas. He brought them all, Jonah murmured. And he's not hiding anymore, Wakara added. They'll come at nightfall, Sani said. With numbers. Or sooner, Cutter said. He don't wait long when he smells fear. They descended in silence. At the cabin, they doubled the traps. Cutter and Wakara reinforced the west wall with a second layer of timber. Jonah lit every oil lamp and torch they had, making the place shine like a beacon. Sani sorted the remaining ammo. They had 37 rifle rounds, 9 shotgun shells, 2 revolvers, 4 fighters, and 1 boy who knew how to be silent when it mattered most. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the sky burned copper, then orange, then blood red, and then it vanished. Night crept in. With it came the howls. Low at first, wolf howls, or maybe men mimicking them. Tavio looked up from his place beside the fire. What is that? It's a game they play, Jonah said. They want us scared. Loud fear makes men sloppy. Are you scared? Jonah paused. Yes. Tavio didn't respond, but he reached for Jonah's hand and held it tight. Then came the voice, Ito. echoing through the trees, amplified by a horn or a pipe. Jonah Whitlock, it called. It was Creed. Even after all these years, his voice hadn't lost that slow preacher's rhythm, like poison syrup. You got my woman, my boy, and what belongs to me. Sonny stiffened. Bring it out, Creed said. The bones, the silver, the past. No one moved. Cutter whispered, Don't answer. But Jonah stepped outside, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. He raised his voice just enough to carry. Come take it, you bastard. Silence. Then laughter. Dozens of voices joined in dry, cracked like bark splitting in fire. Then the horn blew again, and the shadows began to move. Inside, Wakara nodded at Sani. We hold the line. She cocked the revolver. We do more than that, she said. We end it. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thick and slow, covering the footprints of those already advancing. The siege begins. Under cover of snow and darkness, Creed's men launch their first wave. The cabin's defenses are tested. One trap fails. Wakara is injured. Cutter and Sani hold the front, while Jonah faces someone from his past, who forces him to make a deadly choice. The mountain bleeds, and the war has truly begun. War don't ask who's ready, it just keeps coming. The first shot broke the silence like glass. A shadow darted between the pines just outside the west line. Jonah squeezed the trigger before his thoughts caught up. The rifle kicked back into his shoulder, the muzzle flash lighting the dark for half a heartbeat. A grunt, then the shape slumped into the snow. Another one followed. Then another. The woods erupted. Gunfire cracked from every direction. Bullets hissed through the air, punching into logs, ripping through shutters. Somewhere on the north side, one of the tin can alarms snapped and clattered, followed by a man's scream and a crunch as he fell into Cutter's spike pit. Hold your ground, Jonah bellowed. Cutter was already at the east wall, rifle up, breathing hard but steady. They're trying to flank the chimney side. Wakara hunkered behind the south window, bow in hand, loosing arrows with surgical precision. He didn't speak. His face was carved in focus, every movement sharp and exact. Two attackers dropped near the firewood stack, one clutching an arrow buried deep in his thigh. Sani crouched beside the door, reloading her revolver with calm, deliberate motions. She was sweating, lips tight, but not trembling. Not anymore. Tavio stayed in the pantry just like they'd trained him, a blanket over his head, knife in his hand. Silent. Jonah moved between windows, firing where he saw flashes, trying to track movement, trying to think ahead. They weren't charging. Not yet. This was probing, testing. Creed's men wanted to see how strong the walls were. War don't ask who's ready, it just keeps coming. Jonah reloaded. The box of shells at his feet was already down to half. Outside, another alarm rang, a tin wire rigged along the tree line. Someone had made it through. Southwest corner, Sani yelled. Jonah bolted for the back porch just in time to see a figure sprinting low through the trees, heading straight for the cellar entrance. Wakara, he called. Too late. The explosion rocked the ground. Fire burst upward from behind the root cellar. Cutter's oil trap had worked mostly, but the man had reached the blast zone first. Jonah saw a flaming body stumble once, twice, then fall like a star dying in snow. But the blast had done more than kill. It cracked the side hatch clean off. A gap. A way in. They'll press now, Jonah muttered. They'll come hard. And they did. A new wave screamed out of the darkness, 6 or 7 figures rushing straight at the front. Gunfire erupted from the porch. Cutter dropped 2 before they reached the steps. Sani fired from the window, hitting one in the chest and spinning him sideways into the snow. But one made it to the door. The boards shuddered as he slammed his shoulder into it again and again. Jonah spun, fired through the wood. A muffled cry. A thud. Then silence again. It didn't last. A window shattered in the back room. Jonah rushed in just in time to see a man halfway through the frame. The intruder's eyes met his. Recognition flashed. Jericho. Jonah breathed. The man grinned, blood on his teeth. You remember, Jericho had once been a scout under Jonah's command. Back in the army. Back when killing was routine and mercy was a weakness. Now he looked feral, starved, hollow-eyed and wild. I told Creed I wanted you, Jericho said. Jonah didn't speak. He stepped forward and drove the rifle butt into Jericho's jaw. The man fell backward with a scream, half in, half out. Jonah pulled his revolver and ended the debate. One shot. Quick, clean, and loud. Back in the main room, Cutter cursed. They're circling north again, trying the slope. I'll go, Wakara said, already moving. But as he reached the rear door, a bullet snapped through the window and struck him in the thigh. He went down hard. Damn it, Cutter growled, dragging Wakara back with one arm while still firing with the other. Blood soaked the floor behind them. Sani dropped beside Wakara, pressing cloth to the wound. Through and through, she said. But deep. Wakara gritted his teeth. Just a scratch. Liar, he chuckled, then groaned. Let me know when they reach the porch. Jonah returned, face hard. They're pulling back again. Regrouping. Then we've got maybe 10 minutes, Cutter said. Maybe. Jonah looked down at Wakara. Can you fight? I can shoot. From here. Jonah nodded. Sani handed him a fresh rifle. Cutter checked the last of the traps. We're running low on everything. Jonah looked at the door, then at each of them. We hold, no matter what. They nodded. Even Tavio, who had crept out from hiding, clutching the knife like it was part of him now. Jonah knelt before the boy. You did good. Tavio looked up at him, eyes older than they had any right to be. I'm not afraid anymore. Jonah put a hand on his shoulder. That's not the same as being ready. I know, Tavio whispered, but I still won't run. The wind picked up again, and with it came the voice. Creed. Closer this time. You killed Morgan. I expected that. But Jericho too, that stings. He paused. But I'm not angry, Jonah. No, I'm proud. You finally became the monster I always knew you were. Jonah stepped onto the porch. I'm not a monster, he called back. I'm the reckoning. Creed laughed. We'll see. One more sunrise. That's all you get. The night swallowed his voice. Inside they reloaded. Bandaged Wakara. Reinforced the broken cellar hatch with what they could fund. No one slept. They waited. They breathed. They counted bullets. And as the fire burned low, Cutter said quietly, This ends tomorrow. Sani looked at the flames. No, she whispered. It ends with him. The final assault begins before dawn. Creed brings his full force to bear. The battle turns bloody. Cutter is wounded defending Tavio. Wakara makes a last stand at the ridge. Jonah faces Creed one-on-one. Sani makes a choice that changes her forever. The mountain will decide who is worthy of survival. Some wars you don't walk away from, you crawl, or you don't get up at all. The sky hadn't even begun to pale when the horns blew. Low guttural. Less a call, more a curse carried on the wind. Jonah was already on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the tree line. The snow had stopped sometime after midnight, leaving everything ghost white and still. Too still. Inside, Cutter loaded the last shotgun shell into the pump, his hands shaking from the blood loss. The gash on his ribs was wrapped tight, but he was slower now, each breath a chore. Sani knelt beside Tavio, checking the leather vest she'd sewn for him from a cut saddle. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it might stop fate for a second longer. "You stay in the crawl space," she said. "Not a sound. Not even if the walls fall." Tavio nodded. "What if you don't come back?" She kissed his forehead. "Then you wait. And you fight if you have to." Wakara lay by the rear window, his bow beside him, a rifle balanced across his chest. The bandage on his leg was soaked through again, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "They'll come from all sides," he muttered, "fast and hard. They'll want to end it before the sun sees what they did." Jonah stepped inside. "It ends with Creed," he said. "No matter what happens here, we take him down." Cutter pushed himself to his feet. "Then let's make this son of a bitch bleed." The horns blew again, and the forest screamed. Dozens of men came pouring out of the trees like wolves out of fog. Gunfire cracked from every direction, muzzle flashes stuttering like lightning in a storm. Jonah took down 2 from the front porch before ducking behind the stacked logs. Bullets tore through the timber, sending splinters into his face. He grunted, rolled to the side, and fired again. Inside, Sani shot from the corner window, nailing a man as he tried to toss a fire jar onto the roof. The glass shattered harmlessly in the snow. "They're trying to burn us out," she yelled. "Let 'em try!" Cutter growled, firing from the opposite window. One round, then another. His breath came ragged, his face pale. A crash exploded from the back door. Jonah whirled. 3 men were already inside, having slipped through the damaged hatch behind the root cellar. Wakara didn't wait. He rose with a grunt, grabbed the bow, and let loose 2 arrows. Both found their mark. The 3rd man rushed him. Wakara drove the blade of his belt knife into the attacker's throat. They collapsed together. Wakara didn't move again. Jonah fired, hitting the last man, just as he turned on Sani. "Clear the back," Cutter shouted. "Wakara's down, I'll cover Jonah." Dragged Wakara's limp body behind the table, checked for breath. None. He closed his old friend's eyes. "No more crawling," he whispered. Then rose. Outside, more screams. One of the traps had gone off a buried spike pit. Men howled in pain, but more kept coming. Sani was reloading when the wall behind her cracked. A man burst through, wild-eyed, axe raised. Cutter stepped in front of her. The axe came down, and Cutter took it across the shoulder. He dropped to one knee, shoved his shotgun up into the attacker's gut, and fired point blank. The man flew back. Cutter slumped. Sani caught him. "Cutter, just a scratch," he coughed. "Tell that mountain bastard I said sorry for bleeding on his floor." Jonah helped drag him to cover. "He's still breathing," Sani said. "But he won't fight anymore. Then we do it for him." Jonah stood, slung the revolver low on his hip. "I'm going after Creed." Sani looked at him. "Where same place he started this war. He'll be watching from the ridge." She stood too. "Then I'm coming." "No," Jonah said. "This ends between me and him. She stared him down. "You'll die," maybe Jonah said, "but not before I make him pay." Jonah moved through the trees like a shadow. The battle roared behind him, gunfire, shouting the wet sound of blades meeting flesh. But up ahead, the ridge was quiet. Too quiet. He reached the summit, and there he was. Creed stood tall in a black coat, his face leaner than Jonah remembered, eyes like polished stone. Around him, 2 guards, both armed, both watching. "Jonah Whitlock," Creed said, voice smooth and slow. "Come to kneel," Jonah said, stepping forward. "Come to bury you." Creed smiled. "You never learned when to run." He signaled. The guards raised their rifles. Then crack. A gunshot echoed from the woods. One of the guards dropped. Creed flinched. Another shot. The second guard fell, gasping. Sonny stepped from the tree line, rifle raised. "I told you I wouldn't let you die," she said. Jonah nodded once. "Glad you didn't listen." Creed growled, pulled his pistol, and fired. The shot grazed Jonah's arm, spun him, but he stayed upright. Jonah fired back, missed. Creed charged. They crashed together in the snow, fists swinging, knives flashing. Jonah caught a cut across his ribs, drove his elbow into Creed's throat. Creed grabbed his collar, slammed him into a rock. "Still not enough," Creed hissed. "Neither are you," Jonah gasped. He headbutted Creed, disoriented him, then drew the knife Wakara had carved him years ago and buried it in Creed's heart. The outlaw froze. His mouth opened. Then nothing. Creed collapsed. Jonah staggered, bleeding breath hitching. Sonny caught him. "It's over," she said. "No," Jonah rasped. "Not yet." They returned to the cabin at dawn. The battle was done. Creed's men had fled or fallen. Cutter still breathed. Wakara did not. Tavio emerged from the crawl space, eyes wide. Jonah dropped to one knee. "You're safe now." The boy nodded. "So are you." Jonah looked at the ruin of the cabin, the broken traps, the scorched snow, and the bodies scattered like forgotten warnings. "No," he whispered, "but we're still here." The morning after the siege, the survivors gather the dead, tend to the wounded, and face the emotional wreckage left behind. Tavio asks Jonah the truth about what was buried. Sonny makes a vow to return the sacred bones. Jonah prepares for one final journey down the mountain to bring the past home where it belongs. Closure, if it can exist, is near. Some things ain't meant to be buried, especially the truth. The smoke still hung low over the valley, clinging to the earth like fog born of fire and blood. Morning light filtered through it in broken shafts, casting the world in gray. The cabin stood barely a wounded beast of wood and stone, scorched, but not fallen. Jonah sat on the porch steps, arms braced on his knees, watching the snowflakes drift slow and soundless. His shirt was torn, bandages seeping red at the shoulder and ribs. The knife he'd killed Creed with sat on the step beside him, cleaned, but not sheathed. He hadn't moved in an hour. Inside, Sonny tended to Cutter, whose breath rattled softly as he slept, a quilt tucked to his chin. His shoulder wound was deep but clean. He'd live if the fever didn't take him. She changed his bandage, wiped his brow, then walked outside. Jonah didn't look at her. "Wakara?" he asked. She shook her head. "I buried him. Under the cedar, where the land slopes just east of the ridge." Jonah finally nodded. "I put his bow there too," she added. He'd have wanted that. Silence stretched between them, heavy and long. "I'm taking the bones home," Sonny said. Jonah didn't respond. She sat down next to him. "You said they're buried beneath the floorboards. The ones Creed was after." Jonah's jaw tightened. "They were stolen from a burial ground near Mesa Ridge. Sacred things. Wakara and I found them during a scout. The brass told us to take what we could, so we did. We didn't ask, didn't care. And you kept them." He nodded. "Buried them when the war ended. I told myself it was to protect them. But it was really so I didn't have to look at what I'd done." Sonny looked out toward the tree line. "You think bringing them back makes it right?" "No," Jonah said. "But it might let them rest. Might let us rest." She stood. "Then we leave at first light." Jonah rose too slowly, wincing. "We?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "This ain't just your burden anymore." That afternoon, Tavio helped dig the last of the graves. They buried 4 of Creed's men who hadn't crawled off into the woods. No markers, just names scratched into a plank of pine and laid flat over the snow. Jonah watched the boy, his small hands working the earth and his face older than his years. Later, Tavio approached him. "You lied," the boy said. Jonah raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "You told me you didn't remember where the bones came from. But you did." Jonah sighed. "Yeah." Tavio's eyes narrowed. Why Jonah didn't answer right away. He looked down at the scarred earth, the churned snow, the burnt wood around them. "Because I thought if I said it out loud," he finally whispered, "it would make it real." "It was already real," Tavio said. Jonah looked at him. The boy was right. Too right. "You hate me for it." Tavio shook his head. "No. But I don't think you can fix it with just a shovel." Jonah smiled faintly. "Smart kid." Tavio shrugged. "Wakara used to say, 'Truth's like bones, it don't stay buried.'" Jonah stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. "Then it's time to bring 'em home." That evening, Jonah pried up the floorboards in the back room. The wood creaked like it remembered. Underneath an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. He lifted it out slowly, reverently. Inside, bones, carved figures, a medicine rattle still filled with stones, and a silver pendant scorched at the edges. Items taken from the Ute burial site. Sacred, stolen, forgotten. Sonny stood behind him, watching. Her eyes didn't blink. She knelt, touched the edge of the bundle. "These were never meant to be here," she said. "No," Jonah said, "and neither was I." They packed light. Sonny carried the bundle. Jonah carried the rifle and a canteen. Tavio walked between them, quiet but alert. They left Cutter with enough food and ammo for a week. He was too weak to ride, but waved them off with a crooked grin. "Go bury your ghosts," he said. "I'll keep the fire lit." The snow had softened by morning, the trail slick but passable. They rode along the old ridge path, the same one Wakara had used to signal Jonah days before. The sky was wide, again blue and crisp, as if the mountain had taken its fill of blood and decided to breathe. They passed burned-out trees, forgotten camps, animal tracks, long frozen. No sounds but wind and hoofsteps. No war. Just aftermath. Just reckoning. That night, they camped beneath the stars. Sonny laid the bundle near the fire but didn't unwrap it. "Tomorrow," she said. Jonah sat across from her. "You ever wonder if this place remembers everything he asked?" She nodded. "It does." He gestured to the darkness around them. "Then maybe it forgives too." No, she said. The mountain doesn't forgive, but it teaches. He stared into the fire. Then I've got a lot to learn. Just before dawn, Tavio sat beside Jonah. You scared the boy? Asked. A little, good Tavio said. That means you're still human. Jonah chuckled. You've got too much Wakara in you, he said. Tavio looked up at the stars. I think that's a good thing. Jonah nodded. Yeah, I do too. They reached the sacred site. The burial ground is not empty, it's watched. Sani performs the ritual to return the bones. Jonah must face the tribal elder and admit what he did. Forgiveness isn't given, but acknowledgement is. Tavio leaves a personal offering marking his place in the cycle. The story ends with the mountain silent, the past buried where it belongs, and a future uncertain but possible. The sun was just beginning to rise when they reached the ridge overlooking Mesa Ridge. The air felt different here, not colder, not heavier, just older, as if the trees themselves had been waiting unmoved, watching all the years roll past, like wind through pine needles. In the distance where the land dipped into a sacred basin cradled by stone lay the burial grounds. Snow clung only to the edges. The center was bare, as though the mountain itself had warmed that earth for their return. Jonah reined in his horse. Sani dismounted first, lifting the wrapped bundle from her saddle with both hands. Her movements were precise, reverent. Tavio followed her, clutching a small cloth bag of his own. Jonah climbed down, last slower sore from wounds old and new. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Sani said quietly, "We walk from here." They left the horses tethered beneath a stand of juniper and followed a narrow path etched faintly into the ground. It was more instinct than memory guiding Sani now, each footstep sure, each breath deliberate. She hadn't been here since she was a child, but she remembered. The earth remembered too. At the basin's edge stood 3 figures, elders. One was an old woman draped in red wool, with a gaze like smoke, soft at first, but with something sharp beneath. Another was a man with white braids down to his chest, leaning on a walking stick carved with stories no white man had ever read. The third stood silently, in the back youngest of the 3, face streaked with ash and paint, watching every movement. Jonah stopped. Sani stepped forward and held the bundle out in both arms. The old man spoke, his voice gravel dragged across stone. You've brought them home. Yes, Sani said. And more. The elder looked past her to Jonah. He didn't move. I was one of the men who took them, Jonah said after a long pause. I helped dig them up. I carried them in my pack. I buried them again to hide what I'd done. I thought maybe that would be enough. The old man listened, said nothing. Jonah took a step closer, hat in hand. But it wasn't. And I don't ask forgiveness. I just want them to rest. And if there's a debt to pay, I'll pay it. However you say. The woman in red nodded once. Forgiveness is not ours to give, she said. But the land sees. The land remembers. The land balances. Sani passed the bundle to her. The old woman took it gently, as though it might still breathe. The youngest elder gestured to the circle of stones where burials were once made. You may watch, he said, but you do not enter. Jonah nodded and stepped back. Sani followed the elders toward the circle. There they began the ritual. They unwrapped each item with care. The bones were cleansed with smoke and dusted with crushed herbs. The carved figures were set at the 4 cardinal points as they once had been generations ago. The silver pendant was laid near the heart of the burial facing east, the direction of new life. Tavio stood still at the edge of the circle, eyes wide. When the prayers were finished and the soil was laid back over the sacred pit, he stepped forward and held out his own cloth bag. "I brought something too," he said. The youngest elder took it and unwrapped it carefully. Inside, a hand-carved figure of a bear, small and simple, etched with the boy's own markings. A gift, an offering. The elder looked to the others. They nodded. He placed it in the soil. For a moment, everything was still. The wind stopped. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then the old man spoke again. "Your blood remembers," he told Sani, "and your spirit is strong." She bowed her head. He turned to Jonah. "You walked away from war, but war did not walk away from you. Now you have carried it here not as a weapon, but as a truth." Jonah met his eyes. "I can't undo it." "No," the elder said, "but you did not run, that matters." Then they turned and left, disappearing into the trees as silently as they had come. Jonah let out a long breath. Sani stood beside him, watching the earth settle. "It's done," she said. He shook his head. "No. But it started." They walked back up the ridge in silence. Later they broke camp by the horses. Tavio pulled his blanket tight around his shoulders and looked up at Jonah. "Will it ever stop?" the boy asked. The fighting Jonah looked out over the horizon. The mountains stretched on layer after layer, fading into blue haze. "I don't know," he said. "But maybe it changes. That's something." Sani mounted up. "Where will you go?" Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. "Don't know. I thought I came to that cabin to die. But now—" "You lived," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, and I reckon I've still got things to do." Sani looked toward the trail that wound east toward the reservation. "We'll head home. There's healing to be done." Jonah stepped toward Tavio. "You've got her strength," he said. "And your own kind, too. Don't forget that." Tavio looked up. "Will I see you again?" Jonah smiled. "I hope so." Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the knife Wakara had carved for him. He held it out. The boy hesitated. "Go on," Jonah said. "He'd want you to have it." Tavio took the blade carefully. It fit his hand like it belonged there. "Thank you," he whispered. Jonah stepped back. "Ride safe," Sani said. "You too." They parted ways at the fork in the trail. Jonah turned west. Sani and Tavio rode east. The snow fell soft and slow again, but not bitter. Not like before. Jonah didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because for the first time in years he could move forward. Back at the cabin, Cutter leaned in a chair on the porch, sipping warm tea, watching the fire burn low. He'd seen many men ride out into the wild with blood on their hands and ghosts on their heels. Most never came back. But this time he believed something different. Something had ended up there on that ridge. Not just creed, not just a war, but something older. And in its place, maybe, just maybe, a new story had begun. One not carved in bullets and bone, but in truth. And in truth there is weight. But there is also peace. Because some things ain't meant to be buried, especially the truth. And when you face it, when you carry it all the way home. Sometimes the mountain lets you leave with more than just scars. Sometimes it lets you leave with your soul.